Chapter 1. Perfect, just like that. Imogen smiled at the praise from her new boyfriend, Dr. Gabriel Davis. She still couldn't believe she'd somehow snagged his attention when she came to help her aunt around the farm during the fall. What did she do to deserve the easy affection of a sweet, gorgeous man with tattoos, who was in reality a big old softy? Whatever it was, she never wanted it to change. Good girl. Gabe stood watching from outside the round pen as Imogen worked with Fortune at Liberty. In the few weeks since she'd owned him, this was the first time she'd been allowed in the round pen alone since they'd started their horsemanship training, without her trainer, and it was a big sign of trust in both her and her unpredictable horse. The large horse snorted, the warm air from his breath creating a mist and making him look like he was blowing smoke out of his nose. The dragon stopped suddenly, dropping his shoulder, coming into the center of the Mustang pen when she lost focus. Her head snapped up and she raised a gloved hand, blocking his movement and pointing it to her left, asking the thoroughbred to move back to the rail. The flag in her right hand acted as an aid for her safety. She hadn't needed it yet, but that was a close call. Yes, very good. You need to always pay attention. He's going to test you, Gabe said. She clearly had lost focus for a moment, which was dangerous with an unpredictable horse like this, but redirected quickly. Imogen was a natural. He really shouldn't be surprised. Everything she did, she put in 110%, and there was a lot at stake for her now. It had only been a few short weeks since learning groundwork and positive reinforcement training with his Mustangs. Now that groundwork had become almost natural for her. It was time to let her work with her new horse and introduce the aids to him. Gabe had been working with him privately, teaching him the basics to prepare him. Now that Imogen was clear with her own aids, she and Fortune were growing together and building a better way to communicate. It was thrilling to watch. Fortune, for his sake, was a quick learner as well and had taken to the training like a duck to water. He was incredibly smart, and Gabe was convinced a lot of his behavioral issues were a result of needing more mental stimulation, which is why they found themselves in the round pen early on a Sunday morning with frost on the hard ground and a biting wind coming down from the mountain. Winter was well established in the northern woods, despite the little snow they'd received so far on Christmas. Whoa, Fortune, whoa. Imogen brought the gelding back to a stop, and he halted, snorting, and squarely facing her in the center of the pen with his head up and ears at attention. When she reached out a hand in welcome, he relaxed, lowering his head and walking forward at her silent request for a little scratch. She looked over at Gabe with a huge grin. He's doing so well. He smiled in return, proud of them both. He is. You're doing well too. He entered the pen and walked to the center to lean down and give her a kiss. Positive reinforcement was good for everyone after all. Imogen smiled flirtatiously. That's because I have a very smart and patient teacher. She reached up to play with the hair at the base of his neck, peeking out from underneath the knitted wool cap that matched the blue of his eyes. How could she resist this man? He was as handsome as he was kind, dedicating his only day off to helping them. Gabe's dark hair curled slightly at the top of his coat. He'd let it grow a little longer since the holidays, and she loved it. She was becoming more comfortable with showing easy displays of affection. It didn't come easily to her, growing up in a self-contained family. Hugs weren't given often as a child, and with the strained relationship with her mother, well, she was usually emotionally guarded. Somehow, both her neighbor and this horse had snuck through those walls and pierced her heart. Imogen was determined to open up and not push them away. They were too special. Gabe smiled down at her from underneath dark lashes, his eyes crinkled at the corners with laughter. You both require a lot of patience, so I guess it's lucky you have me. We are very lucky. Imogen's mood turned from flirtatious to a bit more serious. I mean it. You saved Fortune from going to rescue, or worse, be euthanized. You're a good man, Dr. Davis.
Calling me by my formal name now, are we?
Imogen flicked his nose playfully. I'm trying something new. Do you like it? Gabe grinned wide. Wow, she loved when his dimples came out to play. He was often too serious. She'd decided she was going to make it her mission to make him laugh as often as possible.
I'd rather be unprofessional around you.
Cheeky man, she thought, and gave a delighted shiver. She loved it.
Unprofessional, huh?
And here I thought we'd decided to take things slowly between us. He laughed again and bent down to kiss her lightly. She leaned into it, forgetting her surroundings for a moment, until Fortune nudged her in return. They both laughed. Someone was jealous. Imogen turned to play with the horse's forelock and took a moment to catch her breath. Gabe sure knew how to kiss. The man in question broke the silence.
I happen to believe that slow and steady makes everything better in the end, in both horses and relationships.
Gabe took one of her hands, giving her a caress before letting her go. She gave an adorable little pout.
Now finish up with your horse and we'll have some brunch.
He walked off, putting his work gloves in his back pocket and exiting the round pen, leaving her and Fortune alone for the time being. Her thoroughbred was still unpredictable, but had never shown any aggression towards Imogen, so Gabe felt safe giving them a little space to bond for a few minutes. Her horse. Imogen still couldn't believe Fortune was hers. While growing up in New Jersey, she'd been horse-obsessed like many other young girls, but never thought she'd have one to call her own. Fortune had shown up one day when Imogen had first come to Vermont to help her injured aunt. His owner came to get him, but for some reason, he just kept coming back, until finally, Bianca had enough of his escapes and horrendous behavior under saddle. Her loss was Imogen's gain. Imogen rubbed the horse's forehead one more time. Okay, buddy, you did good today. It's time for a little groom and then a little breakfast for both of us. She laughed as he nibbled her hair. Not that kind of breakfast, silly. Come on, let's go back to your paddock. She led him out of the round pen and tied him with a safety knot to the wooden rail so she could brush him off. Despite the temperature hovering just above freezing, he was drenched in sweat. It wouldn't be good to leave him like that. She got to work grooming him, picking out his hooves, and making sure he was cooled off before putting on his blanket and giving him his feed bucket. He nickered happily and dove right in, as if he had never seen alfalfa pellets before. With that done, Imogen cleaned up her things, making sure to keep her tools organized. She kept infinitely better care here at Gabe's house than in her own room at her aunt's cabin, which was a cluttered mess. As she organized, her mind wandered. Despite not having ridden horses for over a decade, somehow she knew that this horse was meant for her the day they met. It was a feeling deep in her gut, like her life would be changed forever. It would be a lot of work, and more than she knew how to do on her own, which is exactly why she had enlisted her handsome veterinarian for assistance. Gabe was nice enough to train them both in what little free time he had, since she was lacking in horsemanship experience. He was uniquely qualified as someone who had gentled and trained Mustangs. His horses were exceptional, and though he was gentle, he was clear and firm. She admired that greatly and knew she had a lot to learn. That, and she didn't mind that his training her meant she saw Gabe regularly. Their budding relationship was currently in a standstill since they declared their feelings for each other only a few months ago. The holidays were a little rough, but they made it through despite the growing pains. This was a first serious relationship for the both of them. There were bound to be ups and downs along the way. More, they were incredibly different people. Imogen was the type to dive right in when she felt something, so it was a new experience for her to step back and be more thoughtful rather than so spontaneous. Gabe was a slow mover, deliberate, and logical. It should drive her crazy, but she was drawn to him like no one else. He was incredible. When Gabe told her he wanted to take things slowly, she was game if that meant they could be together. As long as they kept moving forward as a team, she wouldn't complain. After all, those kisses were a great motivation. Finishing up her chores, she checked she hadn't missed any manure in the paddock, and Fortune had hay. He'd been staying near Gabe's horses in the extra paddock since he was rescued. Living outside had been good for him, and he was overall much calmer than when he was stabled at Smithfield Show Stables, the big show barn down the mountain. It was a beautiful place, but most of the owners wanted their horses in stalls so they were clean. Imogen looked down at herself, her coveralls covered in dirt, hay, and probably more than a little food, as Fortune liked to rub his face on her. At least here the horses could get dirty and just be horses. She should probably clean up a bit before going into the kitchen. Her clothes were a mess. She'd walked over from her aunt's cabin next door and unfortunately didn't have a change of clothes. Imogen would just have to take off her boots and coveralls and make do with whatever clothes she had on underneath. There was no way she was going to miss brunch. Gabe was a god in the kitchen. Blowing a curl out of her face, Imogen called out to the horses, "Bye, boys. It's time for me to get some breakfast, too." Closing the gate latch behind her, Imogen walked up to the sprawling wood house to spend quality time with the other man she loved.